Well, hey folks, it's your old pal, Megan the Stallion. Welcome back to Total Party Skills. Be sure to hit like and subscribe. If you recall the old parable of the dog with two bones, there was a dog once and he had a nice juicy bone, and he was walking over a bridge and looked over the edge down at the river running below him, and in the water's surface he saw a reflection of himself. But of course he's just a dog, so he looks down and he sees another dog looking back at him, and that dog also has a really juicy and delicious bone. And so in his effort to try to get to that bone, he drops his own bone, and now you just have two dogs staring at each other with no bone between them. As an analogy goes, I kind of feel that somewhat applies to a current state of affairs as Wizards of the Coast, and the D&D fandom. There's a couple different ways you can play with that analogy. In some ways, Wizards of the Coast is the dog with the bone who has dropped their bone because they wanted to try to get another bone that didn't exist, in the form of just the kind of attacked at every angles kind of thing that they've basically done themselves by courting the audience that they've courted and alienating their original audience as much as they have. Obviously, there's a lot of normie gamers out there who don't pay attention to any of this shit. They're not interested in what, the grognard YouTubers have to say, and they're not paying attention to, the woke activist warriors on Twitter. They're just showing up and, playing games with their friends and letting most of this, just kind of pass them by. The people who spend most of their time watching television and never really bother paying attention to the news and all that kind of stuff. So obviously, these are niche topics that, might not in reality quite carry as much weight as we all like to think they do, because those of us who are on YouTube tend to have certain things kind of get reinforced just because they're the kind of reflective bubble thing going on with talking points, and much the same on Twitter. And when you expose yourself to that all the time, you kind of start to feel like, well, obviously the entire community feels this way. How could the other side have the traction they have? I don't understand it. It's because in some ways we all do kind of lock ourselves into kind of a perspective filter, which is enhanced, of course, because the internet itself algorithmically tries to put a perspective filter on us so that it makes sure that we see videos that we're the most likely to interact with and not get too upset and flame out and leave the platform and all that kind of stuff, yada, yada, yada. But they put out Spelljammer, and like a lot of the initial grognard reviews were typically along the lines of, either, why are they making this out to be more childish than it should be? I mean, Spelljammer was already kind of a silly, wonky setting anyway, but do we really have to name one of the books Boo's Astral Menagerie and have giant cuddly space hamsters in the game? No, we didn't need to have that. And then, of course, the more legitimate complaints about the sheer volume of information that they've left out of the new version of Spelljammer about, the rules of, space combat and ship-to-ship engagements and all that kind of stuff. You can take the view that they've just simplified it and streamlined it. And on many levels, I don't necessarily mind that, because as my own kind of dungeon mastering, I'm not looking to have big realistic battle simulators and stuff going on. I'm more about investigating and mysteries and keeping the plot going forward and developing characters' personal goals so that they can interact with the world and start to have an effect on the world around them and all that kind of stuff. But, if big epic space battles is your thing, the simplified 5th edition rules might feel a little lacking. But of course, this is all coming from a group of people who have all been labeled as toxic fans, and so obviously they're real reasons why they don't like Spelljammer is because they're racist or sexist or homophobic or whatever the thing is that you want to work an angle on about however they've presented their arguments as to why they don't like the thing, but yet, like I said, the dog with two bones, okay, so they put out this new Spelljammer. The audience, the original Spelljammer people are a little about it. So, they need to get that new audience to come in and buy the Spelljammer box set. They need to get that second bone. But unfortunately, that audience looks at Spelljammer and thinks, oh, well, this is colonial voyeurism, and these Hadozi are clearly an insult against African Americans, and rah, 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 force Wizards of the Coast to once again come out and humiliate itself by publicly apologizing for what terrible, unthinking, uncaring racial supremacists they all secretly are, despite their continuous attempts to try to purge the texts, and make a point of, like, letting you know that if you buy old books on Drive-Thru RPG, that they were written by terrible people and all that kind of stuff. So, like, what'd you gain? The people, the audience you've been courting actively does not like the basic concept upon which all of Spelljammer is based. Beyond just the Hadozi controversy, the colonial voyeurism of the Hadozi origin, the colonial voyeurism thing applies to the entire Spelljammer setting. The entire thing is based on high seas nautical adventures, just transplanted with a backdrop of, space adventure instead of, actual literal ocean sailing around on. Instead, you're sailing the sea of stars. But it's all supposed to be the same kind of adventure dynamics of, anti-pirate adventures or pro-pirate adventures, spice trading, exploring, worlds. It's all based on colonial era tropes, and so there's no way around that with Spelljammer in particular. What else are you supposed to do with Spelljammer? What kind of adventures are you supposed to have a Spelljammer that you couldn't have in any other setting if you can't engage with the basic framework of how adventures in Spelljammer work? Like, what is there to do that's not going to be reminiscent of colonialism? Because that's kind of the era of fantasy that Spelljammer is based upon. This once again comes back to the thing of why are these companies even making these products if they don't like them, and or is the audience they're courting like a bad audience to court because this audience is not actually inclined to like this stuff? That the current popularity of D&D is artificial. That there's a lot of people who are into it because they've been told it was cool by TV shows like Stranger Things, or by watching Twitch streams of Critical Role, but they don't actually really like what D&D is. For going back even when I was a kid in the 80s and 90s, there's been arguments about how race is treated in Dungeons and Dragons. Being that race is one of the central core defining aspects of a player character in Dungeons and Dragons. I've always kind of taken the Star Trek philosophy towards it, that there are going to be real world stereotypes mixed into some of these things as allegories, so that you can then use them in storytelling to tell allegorical tales, so you can get points across if you so choose to, or you can just ignore it and just have people smack orcs in the head. I mean, to each their own, but if you want to make your players think, and it turns out the orcs they're after are actually not the bad guys in the situation. It's actually like the pretty human mage that originally hired them to go on their mission is actually the one who's at fault. You can do that too. It's fine. Because human beings are not aliens, it's impossible for us to really fully envision what an alien society would be like. And so, any fantasy trope for any kind of made-up fictional creature is going to draw from something within the human realm of experience. So, once again, since that can't be escaped, if you find that kind of thing problematic, then perhaps D&D is not what you should be playing. You might not be, actually temperamentally balanced for role-playing games in general, quite possibly. Or it just might be that, maybe Dungeons and Dragons isn't the one for you. You want something with that with more modern sensibilities. Then I would suggest maybe trying out something like Cyberpunk Red or something. That might actually be much more your temperament. You want social justice activism in your games. White Wolf, or I guess in their current form of Onyx Path. and Renegade Studios, depending on which book series you're looking at. I mean, they're more than happy to, embrace those philosophies, and actually they have since the 90s. You can argue that White Wolf, in its original form, was the first major role-playing game company to have been, ironically colonized by social justice thinking. So, like they've already been doing, or at least been attempting to do what you want. Of course, just like with D&D, there's been many attempts of, in the past, the World of Darkness putting out books that are supposed to address, some culture that's been overlooked, and then people bitching about how they presented that culture anyway. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. The thing is once you've dropped your bone to try to get to this other bone that you can't get your first bone back. Mom already told Jimmy that Billy was her favorite son, and there's no coming back from that. Jimmy is gonna forever look at his mom in a different way, and not care about what she has to say about him, because he's already been rejected. He's been told he's not wanted. Billy's the one that's going to carry this family forward, son. And even if Billy fails and also fucking turns his back on his parents, there's you're never going to really get Jimmy back now, are you? And so yeah, that's basically where, our hobbies culture is right now. And that's sad. I guess that's about it. Hit buttons and all that other kind of stuff. And as always, stay stallionated.